Welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for an in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, welcome your host, Jessica, with this podcast episode of WORKOLOGY.
April is Autism Awareness Month. 1 in 68 births in the United States receive an autism diagnosis. Autism diagnoses are growing in numbers as medical professionals and the public are becoming more aware. As autism diagnosis awareness is also on the rise, and these children are growing into young adults and then into adults, and therefore the number of companies that are looking to maybe hire or build relationships or employ workers, including those with an autism-specific diagnosis, is also increasing. Today, I'm here with David Kieran. He is the Director of Adult Services with a nonprofit called Autism Speaks. Dave, welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast.
Thanks, Jessica. It's great to be here.
Can you talk a little bit more about your background and then also give us kind of the lowdown on what is Autism Speaks?
Sure. So my background actually was in public schools. I was working as a one-to-one teaching assistant with teenagers with autism for a number of years while I was going to grad school to get my master's in school psychology. But before I was able to start that career, I jumped over to Autism Speaks to work on a really cool science initiative called the Autism Genetic Resource Exchange. And I got to visit families all the way across the country who had 2 or more children with autism, collecting a ton of data about from their blood to autism diagnoses and IQ and all sorts of things. And we were storing that information and making it available to researchers from around the world. And then I was able to jump from there onto our adult services department when that first launched about 3 years ago. So that's where I am now, focused on all things that impact adults with autism, maybe especially employment. That's a major area for us that we're focusing on, but also things like housing and residential supports, post-secondary educational options, and lots of other things that impact adults with autism. So Autism Speaks is the world's largest autism advocacy and science organization. We were founded 11 years ago from a number of actually different groups that were already looking at supporting families with autism. And we continue today to fund a lot of science research, but also what we provide are family services that aren't necessarily direct services. So for example, I don't provide job coaching services to people with autism, but what we can do is, and what we do a lot of, is create resources online for free for all families and for service providers so they can learn best practices and how they can support people with autism in all sorts of different areas of life. And we also connect people with autism to the resources in their area that could help them.
And I was saying earlier before we went live on the podcast that Autism Speaks has a wonderful blog, one of the best that I'm seeing in the growing sort of area of content resources on the topic of autism and special needs. So be sure to check it out. Let's talk a little bit about the basics of autism. So what is, and it doesn't need to be the medical definition, but what's the definition of autism so folks can kind of work through and understand why this might be different than other types of diagnoses?
Sure. So you might hear a couple of different terms when we talk about autism. There's autism. Technically, the term right now is the Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. You may hear things like Asperger's syndrome, which is no longer used, but many people who were diagnosed with Asperger's still like to hold on to that term. That's all part of what we now call the autism spectrum. And that is the autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So it's a brain disorder. Developmental meaning it begins early in life typically, and typically lasts through a person's lifetime. And autism basically affects the way that an individual perceives the world, and it makes especially communication and social interaction difficult. So some of the hallmarks of autism are those challenges with communication. So there are about 25% of people with autism will not speak, but they may communicate in other means, either with a technology or with sign language. They have challenges with social interaction. So you may think of someone who is on the, what they used to call Asperger's, very, very bright, but serious challenges with social interaction. So they may come across very awkward. And we could talk about why this is a big barrier for people in getting jobs. And the third kind of hallmark that you see with autism is repetitive behaviors or intense interests. And just to kind of explain the spectrum for a second, the autism spectrum is incredibly wide. So these symptoms of autism, some of which I just described, range in severity from just kind of a minor challenge that someone with autism may be able to learn coping skills to overcome, to life-changing barriers that are extremely difficult for someone with autism and may render them unable to live independently, unable to live safely on their own. So this range, this autism spectrum is something to really keep in mind when we talk about employment, because there are some people with autism who are capable of incredible things, and some people with autism who are really, really challenged by their autism.
I think that's a really important distinction to make, especially when we're talking about employing these adults and professionals in the workforce, that not everybody with an autism spectrum diagnosis fits into a pretty little box.
That's absolutely right. And it makes it hard to talk about, like in this conversation today, we're going to talk about, I think, strengths and skills, but it's super important to keep in mind that we have to, think of each individual on their own. So, a very famous saying, I think it was coined actually by one of our board members, Dr. Stephen Shore, who he himself is on the autism spectrum. He said, if you've met one person with autism, you've met just one person with autism. It's really hard to talk about this diverse group in broad strokes. So having said that, we're going to do that a little bit today, but always keep in mind that each individual with autism is as different from one another as you and I are from each other.
Great. So let's dive right in and talk about how hiring adults diagnosed with autism can benefit an organization or a business.
This is something that we talk to businesses a lot about, and it's really important to keep in mind that this is not about charity. Hiring someone with autism is not about doing what's right or doing what's good. The reason you should hire someone with autism for your business is because it's good for business, it's good for the bottom line. And companies are really starting to recognize this, and they're starting to see some of the strengths that many people with autism share. And they're taking advantage of, frankly, an untapped labor pool. These are people who it's hard for us to actually pin down, but our best estimates are up to 90% of people with autism are unemployed or underemployed. Now, the underemployed is a biggie. I'll just take a second to take a little picture of this, because we hear all the time from people with autism who are intellectually really capable and may have earned, degrees in college, maybe a master's degree, but because of those challenges with social interaction and with communication, they can't get past the interview. And so instead of working at something more commensurate with their intellectual ability, they are pushing carts at the local supermarket, which is a fine job for someone who is really impacted by a disability, or for someone who's, that's kind of what they want. But there are many people with autism who are capable of so much more, and they're stuck in jobs well beneath their ability. So just to get back to your question, why is this good for business? So there's been some research about why hiring people with all disabilities is a really good idea. And those things are, you have lower turnover rate than you do with people without disability, because they're not looking to jump ship and to move laterally or to jump to another company right away. They're often very grateful for the opportunity, and they thrive on consistency. So this is something you can kind of count on, lower turnover rates. You also see higher productivity and higher safety rates, which to some people is surprising. But many people, especially with autism, are really rigid in their thinking, which can be a challenge. But it can also be a strength in the workplace, because they will follow the rules to a T. You also see improvements in innovation, different kinds of problem-solving ability. With people with autism, one way to think of autism is they just think differently. They perceive the world and other people and interactions differently than you and I. So they bring this kind of out-of-the-box thinking that businesses are really liking. And then, other strengths that we see with people with autism include, and this is not for everybody, but for some people, a really strong memory of details, incredible ability to focus for long stretches of time, really visual skills. They're often very visual learners, extremely consistent on repetitive tasks that at least someone like me, I know I would grow tired of doing the same thing for hours on end, and I would start to slip and lose things. People with autism actually get better and better with time. And those are just some of the many kind of benefits to hiring people with autism.
I think it's important to mention that the hiring process or the typical candidate selection process isn't necessarily built for somebody who might be diagnosed with autism or any other type of disability to succeed, especially when you think about some of the communication challenges that those with autism have. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we're all stuck in this model of interviewing, where you sit across the table from someone and you need to maintain eye contact and establish this like rapport of going back and forth, establishing a nice flow of communication and discussion and conversation. We do this for any job, even for jobs where you never will have to sit across the table from someone and have a discussion. So like, why are we interviewing and testing someone on skills that they'll never need for the actual position? And especially when we talk about autism, these are the difficulties and the challenges, the hallmarks of autism. So what we really try to encourage businesses to do is to start thinking about different ways to assess a candidate, especially one that is coming to you with an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. So we asked them, and these suggestions came to us from other businesses, by the way, expand the interview process. If you feel like you have to do that sit-down interview, that's fine, but expand it, add other parts. So one company calls it a walking interview, where you walk through the actual job that is going to be performed, and you see, do they have the skills to perform the job they're interviewing for? You can waive those formal interviews instead and have trial work days, where you have maybe a week or two. You put the person in the exact situation they're going to be in and see how they perform. Interview for the skills they need for the job. Those are like some of the big tips we give, and just we try to educate management teams on why a traditional interview is not going to give you the best idea of what the person is capable of.
What are some ways that Autism Speaks can help employers?
We have several different initiatives ongoing right now, trying to help employers of different sizes. So we have one that's focused on small businesses. We're calling it the Autism Speaks Small Business Accelerator. And this is brand new. We're hoping to put some more information out on the web about it shortly. But we just finished our first 2 pilot projects. And this is designed to help either people with autism or family members to start a small business, usually around the strengths of the person with autism. This is what we're seeing happen a lot across the country. The strengths and the interests of a person with autism. How can we turn this into a for-profit, or sustainable business? And it's also there for existing small businesses in the community who never thought about how can I add people with autism into my workplace? How can I best accommodate them? So these accelerators we're hoping to pop up in different cities around the country. The first 2 were in Chicago and Miami, and we have funding to do 3 more this year. On the larger business side, we have a brand new initiative that we're going to be announcing as soon as next week, actually, Jessica. It's called Advice. And Advice is a consultancy project where we have a group of really experienced corporate disability consultants who will be training junior consultants, and at the same time they're going to be working with new businesses to this autism space. So they're about to finalize their decision on the first set of businesses they'll be working with this year, and it's going to be a pretty exciting list, and they'll have a new cohort next year. So for 2017, businesses who are interested can reach out to us. We can connect them with the Advice Project. The nice thing about this is Autism Speaks and a couple of other funding partners are going to match the company's contributions. So we're basically paying half, and we're asking the company to meet us halfway. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is a website that we've developed called the spectrumcareers.com. And that's the THE in the Spectrum Careers is part of the name. So the spectrumcareers.com. And this is a website that we developed with some partners from Rangam Consultants and the Web Team Corporation. That was led by a person with autism who works at Rangam. Wonderful people over there. They developed this at no cost, so the site is available for free. And it's designed to work like Monster.com or Hot Jobs or any other job board, but it's for people with autism and other disabilities. So they can create resumes on the site. They can apply for jobs and search for jobs by their geography or by keywords. And then we have businesses that can post their positions on the site. We have almost 40,000 jobs posted right now. And we also have a place for support employment agencies, job coaches, other types of service providers. They can register on the site also, so that if someone needs help or a business says, I want to try this, but I think I need a hand, they can be connected through the website.
Did you just say 40,000 job postings on the site right now?
That's what we have now, and we expect that to go up really fast, actually, over the next 6 months or so.
That's really impressive.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of great responses from the business community, and especially through actually good friends at Direct Employers Association, which I think you're familiar with. They really helped us connect to a lot of businesses that were interested in diversity and inclusion, and it's so important to us that we know the diversity and inclusion movement has changed over the last several decades to include lots of marginalized groups, and they've done such a great job. And the exciting thing is right now those groups seem to be really focused on people with disabilities. That's another part of diversity that we need to include.
It's such an untapped talent pool that, like you said, I mean, I agree with everything that you were talking about in terms of the benefits for hiring folks with disabilities. And I think that it's something that more employers, obviously from what you're seeing, are going to be continuing to research and look into.
They are. And it's what's helping. You mentioned the prevalence rate of autism, 1 in 68 children. What is helping the conversation, to be honest, is that there are more and more executives who are parents and who are grandparents. Almost everyone you speak to now knows someone with autism, whether or not it's directly impacting their family. It's touching their lives in some way. And that's helping us, make these conversations get started. And but really the important thing is that it is good for the bottom line of the business. Otherwise, these initiatives wouldn't take off. You might get a one-off project. Wouldn't it be nice to hire a group of people with disabilities temporarily, and then we'll move on? The only way it sustains itself is if it makes sense for the business.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the WORKOLOGY podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. Today, we're talking about how employers can hire adults with autism. We have David Kieran of Autism Speaks on, and you can follow their Twitter account. It's at Autism Speaks on Twitter. A lot of good information that's being shared over there. What advice do you have for employers who are interested in developing their own autism at work hiring program?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that it's not as complicated as you might think, and it's not as expensive as you might fear. One really important stat that I often share with employers is that more than half of all job accommodations cost $0. Like, it's literally an accommodation for someone with autism, for instance. I didn't mention this in the list of kind of symptoms, but many people with autism have sensory sensitivities. So they may be ultra sensitive to light or to touch or to sound. So you may see people with autism covering their ears, for instance. So some people with autism would prefer to wear noise-canceling headphones if they're going to be in a noisy office, or to wear a baseball cap or sunglasses while they're inside because the fluorescent lights really, truly distract them. That is an accommodation that is super easy to make. You say, sure, Bill, you can wear your hat inside. That's no problem. These are accommodations that are really effective for people with autism. They're very often reluctant to ask for them, or they may not have the self-advocacy skills to kind of recognize the solution to their problem and ask a boss for it. But if you have someone kind of looking out for them, these accommodations that sometimes scare employers away are really easy to do and really inexpensive. I said half of them cost $0. The other half, like the vast majority of them, cost less than $500. And they're super valuable because they often help the rest of the workforce, not just that one person with autism. And another thing I say a lot too is, the most sustainable, best practice kind of help that you can provide someone in an office or in a workplace are what we call natural supports. So like once someone with autism has been there for, a few months, the coworkers are starting to get to know this person and vice versa. The natural supports are things that like you and I do for our coworkers on a daily basis and never have to submit paperwork to HR or get approval. I step in and I help out, a coworker who I know maybe has a weakness in some area, and he or she does the same for me. These are things that happen naturally. And what we want to do is kind of coach companies to identify mentors or leaders in the workplace who say, yeah, I want to take this on. I want to be the mentor for this new employee. I'll be kind of the go-to resource. When you can do this all internally, it makes the work so much better, and it costs very, very little or nothing at all. And the last thing that I always say, Jessica, is to presume competence. Don't assume that a person with autism is not capable of everything you are just because they may think differently from you or from most people you know. Presume that they're competent and that they just have differences from you. But those differences can also be strengths because they're going to look at problems and situations in a new way, and you can really tap into something that your workplace has never had before with that kind of perspective.
Agreed. Diversity of thought and experience is a great thing on any team. If you have just a team of everybody who's carbon copies of one another, there's no creativity or new ideas that are getting developed.
That's right. Absolutely.
I wanted just to mention to the audience, we're talking about accommodations just a minute ago, and that's in reference to the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'll go ahead and link to some information for that in the resources section of the podcast. So if you just go to bloggingforjobs.com and go to the search box and put autism at work, we'll be able to get you a transcript of this podcast and then other resources that are available for folks who are maybe looking at starting their own program at their workplace.
And Jessica, that's a great resource. And if I could add one, it's the Job Accommodation Network, JAN. They have these kinds of accommodation ideas and suggestions for a whole list of different conditions, including autism and Asperger's.
We will add that to the list and link to it in the transcript. So, Job Accommodation Network.
Yeah, they go by jan.org, I think.
Can you tell us some success stories that maybe you have heard about in the companies that you've been working with in regards to hiring professionals with autism at their workplaces?
Absolutely. So the good news is this list is definitely growing, as Jessica and I were speaking about before we began the show. Some of the higher profile ones that you may have heard of in the news lately are SAP and Microsoft. So two global corporations focused on high-tech work are seeing that people with autism are thriving, especially with tasks like software testing, software design. But the interesting thing that we've heard from both of these businesses is, and something that we were concerned about at first, is that not everyone with autism is interested in that kind of tech work, and they may be really good at other things that also may require attention to detail and repetitive and routine type work. And they have seen that to be the case. So the good news is they are starting to expand their initiatives beyond just kind of the software testing and design and searching for bugs and things like that. They are giving people more and more opportunities at different levels of the companies, which is just fantastic. I did want to mention a couple others that maybe aren't so well known, but I think are excellent models. Project Search is actually a transition to employment program for the most part. I think it is. They are starting to use this with adults with autism, but it's typically done with the last year of high school for a student with autism who is ready to age out in the next year. The school district will partner with a business in the community and with the vocational rehabilitation department of the local government. And that person with autism will spend the full year not in the classroom. They are out in the workplace, and they do basically 3 internships throughout the year. They switch jobs and try different positions within the business. This has been successful in every kind of industry that you can think of, including where it started was the hospital. It was Cincinnati Children's Hospital in Ohio. And so people with autism were so successful in their internships that the vast majority of them are hired at the conclusion of their internships. And some of the positions that they found people with autism were super good at were prepping instruments for surgery. Talk about a position that's high pressure, that needs attention to detail, precision, and consistency every time. You cannot make a mistake with that kind of position. And people with autism showed themselves to be better at this than neurotypical people or people without autism. So I just love the project search model, and like I said, it has expanded now from that original hospital to all sorts of different industries. Another one I really like is Rising Tide Car Wash in Parkland, Florida. They're soon going to be opening their second location, and I hope to see more and more. But this is a car wash that hires almost exclusively people with autism. They train the people with autism for basically as long as they need to get up to speed. And once they're up to speed, they're hired, they get more than minimum wage, they earn tips. We've heard stories from this group about employees there who have been able to move out on their own for the first time, who have gained the confidence to go out and get their driver's license in their late 20s or 30s for the first time. Social lives are opening up. These are the success stories that we hear from all businesses that hire people with autism. Once they get an opportunity to work, so much of the rest of their lives seem to open up, and they're able to do more and more things that they choose to do because now they have their own income and they have some independence. It's really a wonderful thing. And then the last example I'd like to give, Jessica, and there are many others, is a group called Autonomy Works, and that's in Chicago. This is a business that hires people with autism to do some of that high-tech work. We actually contract with them to create our Autism Speaks Walk web pages. They upload some of the jobs for us onto the Spectrum Careers, and they have shown themselves to be more efficient and more accurate than their competitors who don't hire people with autism. Ultra Testing and Aspiratech are two other businesses doing similar type work, software testing and coding, that show themselves to be more efficient and more accurate than businesses that don't hire people with autism. So I just love all those examples, and like I said, there are many more out there that you can learn about.
Awesome. And so many great business cases, I think, and there will be continue to be more as more companies are looking to hire these really great workers to their organizations.
Absolutely. We literally hear from a new business, every week or so. Businesses that are considering it, or new small businesses that went ahead and did this on their own. It's often started by a parent. So those last several businesses I mentioned were started by parents, who said, I'm tired of waiting for a large corporation to come and help my child, or for the government to come help provide training. It's just too long to wait, and they're not very good at it, to be honest. So these parents said, forget it. I'm going to start a business myself, and I'm going to hire my son or daughter. Mostly it's young men, but I'm going to hire them and their friends, and we're going to do this on our own. And they've done it, and it's working.
Wonderful. Well, where can listeners go to learn more about you, Dave, and also Autism Speaks?
So the best place to go is the Autism Speaks website. That's www.autismspeaks.org. And as Jessica said, from there you can find our blogs. You can go and find our adult services resources and our toolkits. We have over 50 toolkits, I think, at this point, for all sorts of different issues, including employment. And the other link I'd like to plug is the Spectrum Careers. So that's www.thespectrumcareers.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Dave. I really appreciate you walking us through and letting us learn more about why this is such an important thing we should be considering in our businesses.
Thank you, Jessica. It was my pleasure, and thank you for focusing on this topic that's so important to so many people.
Well, and thank you, listeners, for joining the Workology podcast today, hosted by me, Jessica Miller-Merrill, where we discuss the art and science of the workplace, HR, and recruitment. Until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all our past episodes of the podcast.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill, provided by TotalPicture.com.